big meaning. Because you're going to, well, you have, I have, we have heard a lot of good stuff. And you're going to throughout the rest of the day. But "and" is important because we must include in every one of these conversations the component of our most lethal, active firearm offenders and how we engage them and include them in the conversation. Not just youth, but our most lethal, active firearm offenders who have avoided sustained criminal consequences. It's important to understand that a serial shooter becomes a serial shooter because less than 30% in most urban communities are ever prosecuted for their gun crimes. And think about what that communicates to a young man or a young woman involved in gun violence at the level of being a serial shooter. They have made the decision that the justice system does not work for me. Can't protect me? Hell, if I get shot or if I get shot and killed, 7 times out of 10, that cat's going free. He will become over time a victim, himself or herself. So we must include, and we must include them in the conversation. Whatever we do must be informed by them. So how do we get to them? Because they're not looking for us to come to them. Now, they're looking for law enforcement to come at them. You can bet on that. But they're not looking for us. They don't even care if we come. In fact, they wouldn't want us to come. Why? Because of their experiences prior to us coming with folks who look like us, who smell like us, who talk like us. It is often meant big promises, empty promises. So we have to be able, well, willing first, to go at and engage these individuals in spite of what they have allegedly or suspected of doing, in spite of the fact that he may have 7 casualties on his belt. He is walking our street right now, isolated, alone, negotiating all kind of direct and vicarious trauma, and he's in rage. And what he's doing to deal with that or cope with that is he's mixing all kinds of concoctions to negotiate all of that. But he's isolated and alone. So we have to be willing, first and foremost, to accept these young people as partners and as a significant, important part of the solution equation to reducing gun violence, to stopping the shootings in our neighborhoods. We cannot leave them out of the conversation, out of the equation. And whatever we do must be informed by them. I know I'm repeating myself, and that is deliberate and intentional. Because most of the places I have been around this work leaves that population completely off the table. And there are probably lots of reasons for doing that. You have one of these, yes? I'm not going to use a PowerPoint. It's only going to slow me down. And Howard has provided a great example of why not. I get to mess with him. Howard is definitely involved in the work we're doing in the city of Richmond. But the last 9 pages of this document are a reference point for you. I have been set up really well by Roberto. Thank you, brother. Good morning. For the last 8.5 years, prior to March 1st of this year, I served as Neighborhood Safety Director for the City of Richmond's Office of Neighborhood Safety. A new position, relatively speaking, in that 8.5 years ago, the position nor the office existed. But because Richmond has had, Richmond, California, 100,000 people soaking wet, 17 miles northeast of San Francisco, very diverse city, has historically had a violence problem, crisis, gun violence. For a city that size, over a 20-year period, 1986 to 2005, 35 firearm-related homicides per year. Nearly 740-something people were murdered by a firearm in the city of Richmond over that 20-year period. In 2006, the number went to 42. In 2007, it had gone to 47, and again in 2009, 47. And the city decided to do something dramatically different to address this issue. They created a new city government organization, non-law enforcement, Office of Neighborhood Safety, to address gun violence, not gang violence. Why? Because that's what we do most of the time. And by addressing gang violence, which is very important work, we probably rarely touch an active firearm offender. You understand that most gang members don't shoot. Good work to do gang intervention and gang prevention. But if you're using that as a tool to get at gun violence, you may not address gun violence. Not reentry program, very important work too. But most people coming home from incarceration, believe it or not, are not involved in gun violence in most of our urban communities. So you can do a great deal of great reentry related work and never touch the issue of gun violence. And it's easy not to touch that issue and the people most responsible for it. Why? Because they're our most difficult children. They're our most difficult and challenging young people. It's easy to go, okay, I'm going to deal with something a little easier and get a big bang for my buck for doing it. Yes, I'm being somewhat critical. Richmond said, let's create this agency, non-law enforcement, one specific goal: reduce firearm assaults and associated injury and death. And so what we did is that we began by hiring a neighborhood safety director who understands a little bit about that work. The agency would be responsible for program development specific to gun violence reduction. It would also be responsible for resource development specific to gun violence reduction. It'd be responsible for advocacy specific to gun violence reduction. Focus, focus, focus. It would be responsible for capacity building specific to gun violence reduction, both inside government and outside of government. It would also be responsible for improving coordination and services specific to gun violence reduction. It would be responsible for connecting with those at the heart of gun hostilities in our communities. Generational gun hostilities in our communities. Young men who are growing up in war zones in our communities, whose fathers grew up in that war zone and was impacted by that, whose uncles grew up in that war zone and has been impacted by that, whose cousins have grown up in that war zone and have been impacted by that, whose friends have grown up in that war zone and have been impacted by that. Young men and women who are directly engaged in firearm activity because they did it over there. They came in here and did this to me, to us. And it is my responsibility now to be loyal to my community and to protect my community, to deliver justice for crashing your plane into my towers. Did you hear what I just said? For the young men growing up in North Richmond, Central Richmond young men have crashed planes into their towers. And they grow up believing that it is my responsibility to bring justice to the enemy. Year after year after year, generation after generation after generation. We got excited when bin Laden was brought to justice. Any of you remember the night that happened? And what happened in front of the White House? Scores of people were out there cheering. Why? We'd brought him to justice. I want you to understand the mindset of a young man growing up in urban America about justice. So the agency would be responsible for going directly at this individual. And we would be responsible for hiring the credible messengers as city government employees, vested full-time city government employees. They said I was crazy for recommending that as my next move as neighborhood safety director. Yes, I want to hire ex-felons. I want that to be a minimum qualification on the city government application. This is before ban the box. And another minimum qualification must be they have to have a firearm crime in their background. And you want them to be city employees? Absolutely. Full-time, well-paid city employees. And we got it done. And I would tell you that the 4 neighborhood change agents that I hired in 2008 remain with us today. So the city manager in the city of Richmond would say some of the best city employees he's ever hired. And that translates to trust on the street, not a revolving door as it relates to engaging this population and better appreciating and understanding why they shoot and what's going to be required for them not to shoot to address conflict. In 2008, we deployed our first group of neighborhood change agents to do the Cure Violence Project Ceasefire work. Cure Violence, which Roberto spoke of. So very broad outreach engagement, but we also were very intentional and deliberate. We wanted to get into those communities that were most impacted by gun violence and learn who's responsible, why, who's influencing it, why, what's going on, what's happening, why aren't they going to jail? And just by being present and connecting folks to resources through that tool that Roberto spoke of, we saw immediately we saw a significant dramatic reduction in 1 year. 47 homicides citywide by firearm to 28. It was significant how important presence and focus was. But lessons learned and further investigation taught us that more narrowly focusing was going to be even more important. In 2009, we had a 45 homicide year by firearm, and we had 186 shootings with an injury. And I found myself in a room with law enforcement agencies, 8 of them at the federal, state, county, and local level, working gun crimes, and what they said, something we know in general, that they believe that 17 people were responsible for 70% of the 2009 activity. And I went, what the? Wow, we can do something about that. And let me tell you, 17 people, 70% had us on the news every other day, made you feel like you were living in Beirut. So I went, 17 people responsible for this narrative? So I asked those agencies, let me see your list of those 17 people before you share it with one another. I wanted to get an unduplicated count, and we found out there were actually 28 people. So still something we could get our arms wrapped around. And so I come back to the Office of Neighborhood Safety now. This is the first quarter of 2010, and I say to my change agents, that's our street outreach worker, that's our violence interrupter, that's our case manager. They're multidimensional. I say to them, these are the only people we're going to focus on for the next year, 28 people. That's it. No more broad, no more hotspot outreach activity. We're going to do hot people outreach activity. In fact, we're not even going to do outreach. We're going to do engagement with hot people. Hot people and not hot spots. Why? Because hot spots are dictated by hot people. Hot people are mobile. They move. You can focus in one area and wow, things get nice and comfortable. And over there, things are hot and bothered. So we're going to just focus on these young men for the next year. And I'm giving you 3 months to convince them to come to City Hall to talk to me, the neighborhood safety director. And all I told my staff was, tell them, convince them that they're going home at the end of the day. This is not an elaborate law enforcement sting. And tell them that I simply have an alternative lifestyle opportunity that I want to provide them with. Now, when you get to 28 people, you can't bring them all to City Hall at the same time. Why? Because these are the young men who are trying to take each other out, right? So we brought them in 3 separate groups. Now, my staff had problems with me bringing them to City Hall. They didn't think they would come. I was giving them a challenge they didn't think they could fulfill. I said, well, if you're worth your job, you will fulfill this challenge. They're going to come because of your word, and that's what your job is based on, convincing these young men that they can trust you. Why not in the community centers, in the neighborhoods where they live? I wouldn't take my own damn children in those community centers. Why give them anything less? Bring them here to the best seat in the house. Well, what are you going to give them? I have no idea. I've got 3 months to figure that shit. But what we are going to do is give them a hell of an experience when they show up at their City Hall. The best food, the best room, and the best conversation they can get. And in that June of 2010, the Operation Peacemaker Fellowship was born. Now, I know I'm short on time, so I'm going to speak very quickly about what that fellowship is. Before we could leave the room, we lost 3 people within a month to gun violence, 3 of those 28 names. So we invited 25 people to City Hall. And I would have been happy if 10 had showed up. Shit, if 8 had showed up, I would have been grateful. These are the most lethal young men, 16 to 30 years old, based on law enforcement intelligence. 21 showed up. That's a testament to the outreach staff, but it's also a message that these young men really want something to believe in that's specifically designed for them, not something designed for somebody else, by somebody else, which is what we like to do, because it worked for me. And what I offered them was a 7 high-touch fellowship. I'd come up with it, and it was easy. I just thought about simply, what do my own children have access to? I'm going to make sure these young men, active firearm offenders, have access to that too. So it was really easy once I got there. 1, I'm going to make sure that they have access to multiple contacts every single day, Saturday and Sunday, and even when it rains, as Chris Rock would say, from multiple people who are healthy. Every day, high-touch engagement. 2, I'm going to sit down with each of these fellows and create a life map with SMART goals. I'm going to sit down with them and say, this is your life map. What do you want to achieve over the course of this next 18 months? 18-month fellowship, non-mandated. That is, they can tell us to go to hell and 20% do. They don't have to say yes to this. What goes around your housing, around your parenting, around your safety, around your jobs, around your education, and on do you want to achieve over the next 18 months? Your goals. Not only do we give them this goal assessment tool, we literally walk them through the opportunity, walk them through achieving their goals. 1 to 12 ratio per outreach worker. 3, we're going to connect you to every social service opportunity out there. But we're not simply going to send you to the opportunity, we're going to take you. Why? Because you're less likely to go without us. 2, even if you go with a bad attitude, we're going to make sure you get the best services. Even if it means we have to stay and go through it with you until you tell us, I'm comfortable and ready to do it myself. I have to tell you, I think one of the greatest shortcomings of any work to deal with this crisis is the social services platform as it exists today. It's not ready, it's not prepared to address these young men and meet them where they are. So a big part of what I'm trying to do is actually mainstream these young men so that they can actually have a meaningful opportunity once they are mainstream and begin to engage that mainstream social service opportunity that cannot right now meet them where they are. It's pitiful. It's pitiful. 4, I'm not paying criminals to stop shooting, although that's what the media would have you think. If you've seen any of the media representing our work over the last couple of years. In fact, we never asked them to stop shooting. In fact, we never asked them to put their guns down. Why not? Don't want to come off as uncredible. They live in gun zones. They live in war zones. It's a rational idea to carry a gun. Think about the NRA and its membership. They don't live in these war zones, and they believe they need their guns to be protected. No, we never asked them to do it, but history has said the process that I'm talking with you about gets them there. So what we do is we offer them a stipend, a cash stipend, a monetary stipend. After 6 months of their engagement, they become eligible for a stipend of up to $1,000 a month for 9 of the remaining 12 months of their fellowship. They're typically earning, for those who become eligible, between $350 and $1,000 a month. Small price for helping us, being a part of the conversation and contributing to reducing gun crimes in our city. $9,000 over 18 months versus $400,000 every time a young man is shot. 5, which I think is the most compelling part of this fellowship, based on what our fellows tell us, is the transformative life excursions. In California, they get to travel throughout the state with us, with the group they belong to. I don't like to use terms like gangs. With the group they belong to that are fellows. They're going to visit universities, talk to VIPs in those cities, do community service exercises that they cannot do because of safety reasons in our city. And they have a great deal of fun. It's amazing when you take a 27-year-old young man to Disneyland, and at the end of that day, he walks up to you with Mickey Mouse ears on, and he says, "Boss man," with tears in his eyes. It's one of the best experiences I've ever had. And I go, "You're 27 years old, and Disneyland did it for you?" We also take them out of the state and out of the country several times a year. The only difference between out of the state, out of the country versus the in-state travel is you have to be willing to travel with someone you're trying to kill and someone who is trying to kill you. It's an amazing experience to show up on Robben Island in South Africa with groups of men who've been trying to take each other's lives for the last 3 to 5 years. And they come to a common understanding. They would say a common understanding, not a kumbaya experience. But it's hard to see him as a nigger or a sucker when you've had those kinds of experiences. Most transformative life opportunity they, I think, get beyond the relationships that they get on a daily basis. 6, we put a council of elders around them. Elder men who are nearly retired or retired, who've had successful careers, who have successful, healthy families. Brother Hughes, Pender Hughes, has been a part of that. He's a younger elder. Still learning how to work one of these. But elder men who look like them, but more importantly, who aren't afraid of them. And more important than that, who are willing to talk to them where they are. See, Brother Pender Hughes can use a whole lot of big words to say something that you can say differently. And he's willing to do it, in spite of his degrees and his experiences at the university as a scholar. He's willing to sit in the same room and not just talk about these great theories, but talk about what it means to be a man of color in America in a way that communicates to that young man, damn, I'm not crazy. If Howard has gone through this, and hell, Howard will tell you, I can put a baseball cap on, wear some jeans, and walk in a neighborhood, and I'm being jacked by the police myself. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. And then finally, lesson learned. This was not a part of the first offer to our first cohort. We've had 3 cohorts. Subsidized internships. After 18 months, they become eligible to receive a subsidized internship. After 18 months, they're not the same person they were 1 month or 1 day into the program. So, you know, they have a better appreciation for authority and showing up to work almost every day, right? But more importantly, we have a better understanding of who they are and what their interests are and what their passion is. So why not connect them to an internship based on that versus getting them a job for getting them a job's sake? And it's just working better for us because we did the formal before, and it just did not work. As a result, 3 cohorts of fellows since June of 2010. And as the young men would like to say have gone through the fellowship, and those going through it right now, we're in our 4th cohort, fuck with the ONS and you stay alive. That's their language. But I think it's pretty provocative and compelling. 94% of our fellows are alive after becoming a fellow, and that's 2 to 5 years out now. 94% of the most lethal active firearm offenders, who are also the most likely to be victims of gunfire, are alive. 84% of them have not been injured by a firearm since becoming a fellow. Here's the biggest, smallest number of the 3. 79% of them, 79%, after becoming a fellow, are not a suspect in a new firearm crime based on local and regional law enforcement intelligence. That translates into lives saved. It translates into, if you like numbers, a 75% reduction between 2007 and 2015, a 75% reduction in firearm-related murders in our city, and a 66% reduction in firearm assaults with an injury during that same period in our city. It's important that whatever we do going forward, that it be comprehensive, community-driven. And what I mean by community-driven is that these very young men be a part of helping you create whatever it is you're creating, that it be informed by them. Because only then is it credible and legitimate from their vantage point. And only then can it truly be responsive to who these young men are and what these young men have experienced. Thanks for having me.